The first African slaves were brought to what would become the United States more than 400 years ago. The impact of that barbaric practice remains today. In the 1860s, slaves were freed, but almost immediately so-called black codes, or restrictive laws, limited where the newly liberated African Americans could live and work. Voting was restricted through a variety of poll taxes and tests. By 1896, the Supreme Court ruled that so-called separate but equal accommodations were lawful. Separate and usually inferior restaurants, hotels, and schools for blacks became the norm. In 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was formed to fight for equal rights for African Americans.
We have a history that, of course, begins with segregation and with treatment of those based on the color of your skin very different than others. So how do we craft our solutions to be sensitive to that reality? How do we make sure, as think about who's stuck at the bottom, we have a strategy that we can help lift them up?
Divisions which have lasted all too long.
In the 1950s and 60s, as the black-led civil rights movement took hold, courts ruled segregation was unlawful. Schools, restaurants, swimming pools, and other public places were desegregated.
We waited a long time for freedom.
The Voting Rights Act and Fair Housing Act brought more protections, but centuries of institutionalized racism had profound negative impacts that still linger. Blacks have lower incomes, less wealth, and lower rates of home ownership. Schools in black neighborhoods are often underperforming, and the incarceration rate for African Americans is more than 5 times the rate for whites. U.S. President Donald Trump takes credit for lowering black unemployment.
We're delivering results for African Americans.
And the presumptive nominee for the Democrats, former Vice President Joe Biden, is promising change.
We know there's been institutional racism in this country before we were a country. It didn't start with Donald Trump, and it's not going to end with Donald Trump. But right now, we have an enormous opportunity to make significant change.
The disparity between blacks and whites has persisted regardless of who is in the White House. Some are calling for reparations, payments, or special provisions for African Americans to create a more level playing field.
See, reparations, the core of the word reparations is to repair the damages that were done by the transatlantic slave trade, issues of Jim Crow, the black codes, other forms of discrimination that were very well put in place that were actually outgrowths of slavery.
Despite all the protests and energy around the Black Lives Matter movement, it's not clear if reparations will ever gain widespread support. There's no end in sight to the hardship many African Americans face because of this legacy of institutional racism. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.